Fiasco here with you. Thank you so much for coming on board and checking out this video here on my YouTube channel. If this is your first time checking out a video here, let me give you a quick background about myself. I am an artist. I have been working in indie comics for about 20 years as an artist. And I have even gotten to the point where I have created and published my very own comic. So here is a graded copy of my comic M Squad #1, perfect 10.0 copy. And while over the years, as I have been working in comics and on these comics, I have had the opportunity to try out lots and lots of different art supplies over the years. Now, I work traditionally. So traditionally means I work on pen and paper. So usually I'm working on Bristol board paper, which is a thicker kind of artist paper. It is a large format size, and drawing with pencils, and then inking with various pens, brushes, etc. This is very traditional way that comic books are created. Typically, you have sometimes two artists, sometimes it's the same person, like for me, where one person draws the art in pencil and then the next person comes in and goes over the top of that with inks. This is a throwback to the traditional way that printing was done, where you needed that solid black and white line art in order to create a plate that you could then print the black lines onto the paper. With traditional or with digital printing and things like that today, things are different. People are doing more digital inking, more digital drawing, with things like Photoshop and other kinds of programs. So you don't necessarily have to work with pens, have a different, pencil or an inker. But again, I work traditionally, and for me, this is I'm going to show you the some of the tools that I use. And so in this particular case, I'm focusing on different tools that I've tried for white media. So what I mean by that is, so if I'm working in a black and white style in order to draw the line work for my comics, and I'll show you a couple examples here. So first, let me show you this. This is a scanned pencil page that I drew. And so just pencils on paper, and then I used Photoshop to slightly darken up the pencil so you could see it better. But this is not a inked line, this is pencil on paper. This is the inked version. And so what I did is then went back over this with ink, and you can see how it's darker. It fills in the shadow black areas. If I had wanted to, I could have taken this pencil page, or the first one, given it to maybe somebody else to ink, and they might have come in with different line work. They might have shaded things a little different, added some different rendering, whatever their own artistic style was. But that is how that traditionally works. So when you are working in that with that format with black ink, there are oftentimes many reasons why you would want to cover up that black ink with something white. You may have made a mistake. You may have drawn a line where it wasn't supposed to be, or shaded in something that wasn't supposed to be shaded in. Or sometimes you want it for an effect. It's a lot easier to add white, for example, stars. If I want to do a scene in outer space, it's a lot easier to put white little dots over black ink than it is to try to ink around tiny little dots. So there's any number of reasons why you do it. For me, over the years, I have tried a bunch of different options. I found some that work, some that don't, and I thought I would take a little bit of time here to do a video to show you some of the ones that I've used over the years, and give you some tips on maybe ones that work for and what scenarios they do work for. So I've created a situation where we're going to be looking at just over a dozen different options of white medium, and then we're going to look at how they work over solid black ink, over various ink lines, over dark marker, and over lighter tone marker. And you'll see what ones work for different scenarios. And hopefully, if you're an artist like me, maybe you'll find something you've never heard of before, something you might want to check out. Or we'll find some that, maybe don't work. Or maybe you even have a different option that's not on this list. And if you want to drop it in the comments, I'd love to hear it. I love new art supplies. It's one of the funnest, most exciting things about being an artist for me is getting to try new stuff. So we're going to cut it over to the my drafting table here where I've got it set up, and we're going to start looking at these one by one and go through them. Okay, so what I've done here is I've created a grid, and I've listed out the particular pen, brush, etc., whatever it is over here on the side. So in case you can't see it on camera, I will call it out. And then we've got a sort of a grid. So how does it work over solid black, over black lines, a dark color, I chose this darker blue color, and a light yellow. So like I said, we've got a lot, so let's get right to it. This is probably one of the most common ones. This is a Jelly Roll ballpoint pen. I see a lot of people use these, so that's what we've got here. This is the Jelly Roll pen. Pretty easy to find. So let's see how it does over a solid black area. So it's good for lines. You can see, and what I'll do after we're done with this, and I've gone through and done it here live, I will either take a photo or a scan of this page, and we'll put it up so we can see more detail. But this is a ballpoint pen. So one of the problems with a ballpoint pen is sometimes when the ball rolls, there's almost like a line in the line. It doesn't, see, if I push down at all, it's not giving me a solid line, basically. It's also very thin, so it's not good for covering up a solid area of black. I wouldn't want to use it for that. If I have black lines, if I want to do something like this and do sort of a cross hatching, that's not too bad. It covers up, certainly on thin lines, like the ones at the end. That seems to work pretty well. Going over a dark color, it's not too bad. It's relatively opaque. You can see when you try to do like this area, if I try to fill in an area or cover up a lot, it kind of, it gets a little thin. You can see on the black it looks a little gray in spots. Here, the blue, you can see through it a little bit. If I'm doing it over something like yellow, not too bad. Of course, that's a much lighter color. Basically, this is good for very, very small areas. Mostly something like this where you're doing very fine lines. If I was trying to either fix a line or add like a white detail, a something like this, a little dot, something would work pretty well. But because it's of its nature of being a ballpoint pen, you do run into the issues where it won't cover completely. It sort of has there's a dark line in the middle because of the roller ball inside the tip, and it's very, very small, so it's not going to cover a lot of area. So not bad. Mostly I would say for something like this you're probably going to be using for things like if you want to add rain, if you have a dark sky and you want to add raindrops, maybe again very fine lines on your figure work, something like that. That would be good use for the Jelly Roll pens. Next, I actually have two different Faber-Castell pens. Faber-Castell Pit pens are something that I use for black ink. So they come like this, and they come in all sorts of different sizes and different tips and brush tips, chisel tips. That's what we have here. So we're actually going to try two of them just to see if they're any different. So there's a chisel tip and a brush tip, and we'll see if that makes a difference at all. So the first one is the Faber-Castell chisel tip. So you see a chisel tip is like a flat, plain, hopefully you can see that. So it has a very thin edge like this, where I could do a super thin line, but it also has a flat edge that I could drag along. Now, right off the bat, you're going to see that it is not the most opaque white, especially in a large area like this. Now, I suppose if I was to layer it many times, maybe it would build up and be a more opaque white, but that could take a long time. So one of the things about these pens and all of this white medium that we're trying out, for me, one of the important tools or one of the important characteristics of it is, yes, I might want to cover up this black, but then if I'm trying to fix something, like let's say I'm trying to cover up this edge, I want to make sure that it covers. That's going to be very important. And as you can see here, it's already, I'm starting to drag some black with it. The other part is once the white ink is down, whether it's ink, we also are going to use some paint today, I want to be able to go over it with black as well. So that's important also. So anyway, this isn't bad. It's just not as opaque as I would like it for something like this. Working on that edge, on that hard thin edge, it does a pretty good job with that. But again, I feel like even the Jelly Roll is a more opaque. I feel like I'm seeing gray in between. This just isn't that dark. Now, this is jet black ink. This is some of the darkest ink that I have from an ink brush that I use. Let's see what happens when we come over to the blue. So we come over to the blue, same kind of thing. It just really grays out, and I would have to really layer, let it dry, layer, let it dry. And it is pulling up. So I go like that, you can see, hopefully, it's pulling some sort of blue. So it is going to mess up the tip, so the next time you go to use it, it might have some of that, whatever you went to color or cover on it. With the yellow here, again, the thin line, not bad on a light color. I think that looks pretty opaque, but it's not having to work that hard to cover it up. There you can see it pulled over some dark ink from what we had already used, and then, yeah. So, not one of my favorites. I got that with a lot of high hopes because I like the black ink Faber-Castell pens, but I found that this one didn't work so great. So now we're going to try their brush pen and see if it's any different. So this is the brush pen, and you can see it's the same ink. So this one is going to have, it's going to be as opaque as well, or it's not going to be opaque. It's going to be kind of gray. With the brush, at least, you could have some nice variation to your line weight. Because the brush tip is very nice. It's flexible, but not, but still very fine. So it has a nice point. If I have a light hand, I could get some very light lines. If I want to go heavy, I could get some very heavy areas. And with the heavier areas, it's a little darker. It's not too bad. If I want to go, harder with it, but again, now I'm also pulling a lot of black up. And by the way, this ink on this paper that I'm covering has been dry for several hours. So it's not like I'm trying to ink over wet, or I'm not trying to put white ink over wet ink over here, wet marker. This has been dry for hours. So not so great. Same thing here. It's kind of grayish. It would work in a pinch. A little better probably over, but it just, yeah. It just pulls too much from what you're trying to cover, and not my favorite. So now we're going to move on to Sharpie. If you're familiar with Sharpie, you've probably heard of Sharpie markers. Easy to get. You get them at office supply stores. You'll hear the clicking. So this is the kind you have to shake. So this is actually an oil-based paint pen, and you have to really shake it up to get that ink or the paint mixed up in there, and then you have to kind of get it started. So let's see. So you take it. It has a pretty thick, kind of a bullet tip, kind of a dull tip. So you're not going to get, and you push it down to get the paint flowing, hopefully. Um, so we're not going to get the kind of fine lines that you would out of the Jelly Roll, or even out of the Faber-Castell pens that we were just looking at. So, and then here's one of the problems with the Sharpie is, can you get the ink to flow, or the paint to flow? And then this one, we're obviously not doing so hot. Hold it down. There we go. So yeah, so it is paint. So if you don't use it regularly, or like this, I'd have to really shake it up. There we go. We're starting to get some flow now, but it's not easy. So you got to have definitely something to the side to test, or to kind of prep it on. That's not easy. There we go. That's way too much, but that's all right. So this is going to be, when it's thick, is going to be very opaque. But you can see over here, it's almost milky. And it could be just that it needs more mixing, more shaking of the pen. This is not something that I typically have in my supplies ready to go, only because I have not found it to be that much better, even if you do really shake it up. You can overlap it a lot, and it will certainly get darker. Again, doesn't have the finest line, but just out of the bat, very thin, very milky. I might come back to this one later, shake it up even more, see if that makes a difference. But again, not the most robust ink there. Now, the next one I have is this Sharpie, which is supposed to be more of an acrylic paint. This is a much newer Sharpie product. I just got one of these recently. People were raving about it. I was super excited. I was like, let me try this out. It has its pluses and minuses as well. You don't have to shake it up. You don't have to prep it or prime it to get it to work. But it's not nearly as opaque, again, as I had hoped. It's not bad. It is a very thick tip. I think they do have some that are finer tip than these, but not super. And it will pull a little bit of that ink up as well. So kind of, I'd say it's a little better than the Faber-Castell, but or Castell, but so far not nearly as white as the Jelly Roll. So kind of maybe in between those two. If I wanted to use it just to edit lines, again, covers pretty well in a small area. That part's not too bad. But because of the thickness of this pen, it would be hard to do for very fine line work. Now, over color, same kind of thing. You're seeing it's a little thin. I can push down a little harder to get, but you also have, so if I push down, it's going to squeeze out more of the paint, and it is like an acrylic paint, I believe. The problem is that it does leave that bit at the end where it is still kind of opaque. It's translucent. You can see through it. And you can see really over the yellow here. It does give a good line, but it's already pulled up some of the black and blue that we've used, so you'd have to be constantly cleaning it off on another piece of paper or something to cover. But overall, the paint's not bad. Like I said, it's not quite as white as this, but not certainly better than here. Kind of an in-between, if I had to kind of give it a grade, Now this one is another pen, more of a like a ballpoint pen. This one is the Uniball Signo pen. This is one I like a lot. I probably go. This is one of my more go-tos. Again, it's going to be a thinner pen, but I have found that, especially when they are very new, the ink is very opaque, and the line is nice and consistent. I don't necessarily get, like with this one with the Jelly Roll, that ballpoint pen look where it's the ink isn't going all the way through. But um, it is a thinner line, and so it's not going to be superb for coloring. But if you have a light touch, you can get the ink to flow, and you can use it to cover up larger areas, as you see. So again, if I wanted to do something here with crossing lines, pretty solid. Over a darker blue. Again, not bad, pretty vibrant white. Um, it's just thin. So again, not great for large areas, but if you're going to do little dots, or as I did here, all these kind of slash marks, very, very good. Works over all the colors, and I can tell you that you can ink over the top of this once it is dry. So this one is right up there. Again, this is probably my go-to. This is one of my favorites. The other thing that I found with this that we'll get to with some of the other ones is this stays relatively white after I'm done with it. So I've done my drawing. I've used this to correct something or to add a white element. When it dries white. We'll find one here coming up soon that actually tends to yellow a little bit, and that is that can be problematic. So the next one, I know this was kind of the rage for a while, and I think there's still a lot of people that use these Posca pens. Now this one it's another one you have to shake up. So it is kind of a paint pen, and I'm not sure. Let's see if it says. It doesn't say what type it is. If it's actually ink, or if it's a acrylic, or a oil-based paint. I'm not sure. And this one is a very fine tip as well. I know you can get lots of different sizes of this, so that's another advantage to the Posca pens. You can find them all over. They're easy to get a hold of in a everyday art supply store like Hobby Lobby or something like that, or ordering online. This one happens to be very fine, and you do the same thing. You push down to get the ink going, and then it'll start to flow. So this one is, again, very nice, very pretty opaque. Once I start to try to go over a larger area, you're going to see it's a little bit gray, so it's a little more gray than where I colored above with the Signa pen, the Uniball Signa pen. But not bad. Certainly, I'd say this is probably more opaque than either the Sharpie or the Faber-Castell so far. So it's pretty flexible in terms of what you could do with this particular pen. Again, this one happens to be a fine line. Fine tip. If I had one that was a larger tip, I would assume it would, possibly cover a larger area better. But, overall not too bad. Again, for this one, I like it for things like that. Like if I'm doing raindrops, or if I was going to do random, stars in the sky kind of thing, small dots. I think that's where it works best. I don't know if I like the overall coverage of the ink. Now, this is one you can also layer up if you need to. So like on the edge of this blue, you can see the blue through it. If I let that dry and came back and went over the top, it would cover more. But if I had to then draw over the top of that again, maybe with an ink line, a black ink line, something like that, I might end up building up too much to where it's actually a rough surface, and I wouldn't be able to ink over the top of it. Likewise, as you work, every so often, you have to kind of give it another shake or two to make sure things are mixed up, give it another prime. So that can take away from your workflow. If you're, you know, if you're working, you're getting in there, you're getting those lines drawn, and you're halfway through a line and it starts to sort of fade out on you, and you got to stop, shake it, pump it back up, get the ink going again, and then finish your line. Sometimes that can really be difficult. So pretty good. Again, so far, just to kind of summarize, I would say for me, the Uniball Signo has to date the most opaque white, probably followed by the Jelly Roll, but the Posca has better, I would say, coverage than the Jelly Roll. So again, for me right now, this would be my number one, number two, number three, and then maybe the Sharpie acrylic at number four, and then going that way. But there are many more to go. So this is one, this is Presto. This is actually correction ink. So this is, again, not necessarily made for art. It's made for correcting on forms, things like that. I know plenty of artists who use this. For me personally, one of the biggest ones was Jim Lee. He's my favorite artist, and I saw him using one of these on live streams, and I was like, oh great! And it has a small point to it. Obviously, you heard you have to shake it up as well, and then you kind of squeeze it, and same thing, you push it down, and it starts to go, and the ink comes out, and you squeeze as you go. So it can go with a fairly small line, not too bad, or it can cover a pretty significant area if you squeeze down and squeeze a lot out. Now, this is very much like a paint. So it is, as you can see right now, it is very opaque. You cannot get the super fine control that you can get from like the pens. It just isn't a fine enough tip to do that, but it will cover a lot. And when it dries, as long as it is a thin coat, you can go over it with another pen. If you build it up too much, you could sit there and just build it and add on top, cover, and it'll literally create a lump on top of your drawing. So you don't necessarily, that could be problematic. The other thing I have found is that because this is not an artist ink per se, again, it's by Pentel, it's really just a correction pen for like an office supply type thing. This ink can yellow. So you'll go back later on your page and you can see where you've used the Presto pen. It's not going to be nearly as white as your paper. Now, when it's fresh like this, yes. But over time, it can yellow. Not a big deal if you're just doing it to clean it up and then you scan the page or you scan the image or you take a photo of it, not a big deal. But if you want to have an original that you're going to sell to somebody, or that you yourself you want to hang or present, you probably don't necessarily want to have big chunky whiteout in it or see it yellow to pick it out. So it's something that I would use. I've definitely used it. I've used it on pages. I've used it on like at conventions. It's really good because it's small, it's compact, it's clean, and again, you can do large areas. You can take this, you can squeeze it out. This is one of the things that I learned. Again, technique that Jim Lee does on his live streams. He'll squeeze out the ink onto either like a brush or a card and flick it, and then you get splatter effects for things like stars or snow or just, you know, whatever it is. This is good because you can squeeze out as much of the whiteout. That's basically what it is whiteout, as you need. Where I can't squeeze stuff out of a pen. So this has a little more versatility in that aspect. But again, it doesn't have a lot of fine line. You're not going to draw little tiny areas. It's going to be much thicker, just due to the nature of the form factor. So pretty good. Again, has its place. I would probably use this more for something if I'm drawing a comic book page that I'm then going to scan in. Not a big deal. If I was doing a commission for somebody and the white isn't a correction, it's part of the artwork, I'm probably looking at one of the other options. But you can kind of see it is very white. By comparison here to here, it's very bright, very vibrant. It looks really good. Next, I have a brand new pen. I actually have had one of these before. This is just a new version. Not a new version, but a new one. The one that I had in the past eventually cracked and started to leak. But this is a Kuretake, so it's a Japanese brush pen. Now, most of the time for these, there is a version of this that I've had for years that is the black. So I love it. This is what I draw. I did use all the used to make all the solid black ink areas here. Very opaque black ink, really, really great. You just buy the refills that are in the handle and snap it in, and then boom, you're ready to go. And then all you have to do is just you just squeeze right here. It says push, and it squeezes the ink down into the brush area, and you're ready to go. Now, I always do it with the cap on, because sometimes if you're not careful, it will squirt out. You have to be careful. So let's see how, I like the black ink. Let's see how the white ink goes. Oops. So it's there, but it's not in the brush. This is, like I said, I just opened this out of the pack. This is brand new. So we got to work the ink down into the actual brush itself. And it doesn't really want to. So I guess that's a knock against it, if the ink doesn't want to go down into the brush. So when you squeeze it, and of course, I have dirty, inky hands, it fills up down into this sort of reservoir here, and then goes into the nylon bristles. And you can see I'm trying to get it down in there, and it's already starting to leak out around the edge a little bit, which is part of the problem I had with the old one. So let's see if that's, there we go. Yeah, and unfortunately it is, the way I remember it. It's pretty milky. It just doesn't have the opacity that the black ink does of this brush. So I'm squeezing as much as I can in without breaking the brush, and it's just not particularly opaque. It is nice that it's a brush, because if I wanted to cover large areas, it's a larger format than a pen, but unfortunately it just doesn't have the opacity. And here you can see it's really picking up the black ink. Same thing here. It's not going to give me a white line until I get all the black ink out. So, So not a winner, unfortunately. I had high hopes for these, and I had hoped that the one that I had before maybe was a fluke. Sometimes you get a bad one, but this ink just doesn't. It's just the ink itself. It's not the brush. It's not the mechanics of it. It's just not dark enough ink, or ironically, dark enough white ink. So not a winner with the Kuretake. Next is another shake one. This is this Malto, which again, it's made in Germany. I had never heard of it before. So this is another pen you gotta shake to get it get it going. It is nice that it does show you on the side here. It's got this little scale to show you how much ink is left in it, so that's kind of cool. And then this one has also more of a bullet or blunt kind of point tip. And you do have to, again, you push it in to sort of prime it. But pretty good. Pretty decent opacity for the ink. Certainly not a fine line, but it will cover. It does, again, have a tendency to pull up a little bit of that black ink with it. So after a few uses, you're going to have to go to another piece of paper, clean it off, maybe shake it again, that kind of a thing. I don't know that I would be looking to use it for large areas again, because it's going to pull that black ink with it, and then it kind of turns it into a gray mess. Good for like this, you see, for dots, but not super fine lines. If you have a really, really light touch, maybe it's not too bad. But definitely not like, you're not going to fix an area around it. Whoops, that wasn't supposed to be all shaded in. Let's see, over the blue, not too bad. You might have to go a layer or two if you really want to be covering every bit of it and trying to hide the blue you put down, but not bad. Kind of a middle of the road, I'd say. Probably similar to maybe the Posca pen in a way, but just bigger in terms of the quality of the ink. And then over light color, pretty good. Probably, yeah, could probably cover up quite a bit with that. So again, if they do make the Posca pens in larger formats like this, I don't remember where I heard about this one, but I decided I would give it a shot, and it is pretty good, pretty solid overall, kind of middle of the road, not too bad. The next one here is this Zig brush pen white ultra fine. Again, that means if it's ultra fine, they probably make it in other sizes. It again is a brush, and it has ink inside of it that you turn the bottom to push the ink up into the bristles of the brush. So I have not used this one in a while. Hopefully there's still plenty of ink in here. It looks like it. There we go. So it's, some of this might be because it is a little bit older, but it's not great. Again, the reason why it's a little bit older, I haven't used it in a while, was because I found that it did kind of go gray, right? So it's either pulling up some of the black ink, or it's just not opaque enough to cover it. It just gives you that gray wash kind of thing. The other part is, once you, as you can see, as you twist it to get the ink flowing, now I have ink dripping out of it. So it's a little hard to control the ink flow, which is disappointing. And this is a water-based pigment, it says. So, okay, it's a brush, so you're gonna have, you know, it's like a nylon tip brush, which means over time the brush tip itself is probably going to wear out. So it's, even if you have good control and a fine hand, probably not the greatest line work for something like this. But at the same time, it's not, the ink isn't good enough to just be like a brush where I'm going to paint out areas. So kind of isn't great. It's not great for line work, and it's not great for coverage, so it kind of misses on a couple different things. Um, so it's again not, where does it fit? It's not the worst, but it definitely is not the best so far. Um, Again, before we get to the last couple, these are all pens or some sort of pen or brush pen. Things that have caps, things you can take with you, things that are very travel ready, which is nice. So again, if you're working convention or at a desk or an area where you're worried about being messy or making a mess, um, these are great. So far, my favorites: the Uniball Signo, the Posca, the Presto is good, but again, just word to the wise, it can kind of yellow a little bit. The Molotov is probably a step below, maybe in line with like the Posca in terms of the white. The Jelly Roll is good, but again, you're not. I have never gotten the line consistency that I like with it because of the nature that it's just a ballpoint pen. Um, and then the rest are kind of falling into they're sort of gray and muddy. The Sharpie acrylic isn't bad, but just not where I had hoped it would be. So now we're actually going to get to a couple of paint options because there's nothing that says you can't use paint. And so I'm going to try, hopefully, I'll get some of this. I have two options here. I have white watercolor paint and white acrylic paint. Both are liquid paint. And we'll see. So this is the white watercolor paint. So I just put a little bit here on this paper plate just so I could get it on my brush, a little bit of water. Now, because this is watercolor paint, the more water you apply, the more translucent it's going to be. So if I want a opaque coverage, I've got to use a thicker amount of paint. And this comes back to something I mentioned earlier. I can put an ink or a paint or something on here to cover, but I also may have to then go back over it. And if I have to put this really, really thick to cover, then I may not be able to go over it again and correct the ink line later. And as you can see, now that part of this is the brush I have. You could have a super fine brush if you want to get a fine line. But this is also the nature of it. It's paint, so you are sort of dependent on the watercolor brush you have. You may have one that is nice and fine and gives you a good line. You may have one that's thicker like this, but you may want to use it for different effects too. This might be good for, maybe you're doing water, trying to do light on water or something to that effect. It does also appear to me, just to my eye now, this is not the newest watercolor paint. I didn't just buy this today. I've had it for a while. And to me, it looks yellowish, especially compared to the white of the paper itself. So that may be problematic if your paint is not brand new. It may not work so well. So it's not the greatest for covering. Again, it's not pure white. It's a little off compared to the paper. And it's also messy. So if you were to be using this and trying to do it on the road, now you need water, you need brushes, you need paper towels, you need a palette of some kind. And yeah, to me, very yellow. So not, in my mind, the best solution, but maybe for a very unique situation, you might want to use it. So that's watercolor paint. And now I'm going to try some white acrylic paint. So we have this is acrylic craft paint that actually my daughter had available. I just said, hey, real quick, do you have any white acrylic paint I can use for this video? She said, yeah, here you go, Dad. And so I'm not particularly, I don't know anything about this particular brand. used it myself, but we will see. So you right off the bat, you can see here it's much whiter. I mean, there's that compared to, hopefully it comes out on the camera. This is the yellowish of the watercolor paint, and then you have the acrylic paint. So I'm going to start with, again, you need a little bit of water, even with acrylic paint. It's not watercolor, but it is water soluble. So I'm going to use a little bit of water, and I'm going to start with a large brush just to see how it kind of covers. So again, the less water and the more paint I use, I can make it as thick as I want and certainly cover more opaquely. Now, I may have to, even if I just go pure paint, it'll cover, but I might have to do a layer or two. I'm also going to have brush strokes in it. So that's one negative to it. The other side, of course, is, again, it's messy. I've got to have different brushes, different brush quality, different brush sizes, all that kind of stuff. So here's a very, very fine brush, and even then, it's okay, but every couple lines you got to go and feed the brush, and otherwise it's going to start getting back to that translucent gray, right? And if you're like me and you're not, so I'm more of an illustrator than I am a painter for sure. So I don't necessarily have the greatest brush technique. So I would be struggling to try to get the same line quality that I can with a pen out of a brush. But certainly the white quality is good. It will cover literally anything if you do it thick enough, but then you also have a big blob of acrylic paint on your paper. So something to take into consideration. Now, this is also where you could use this paint, because you can get as much of it as you want in an area to do splatter effects. So you could take, a toothbrush or something, or even a brush like this if you really want to. If you get enough paint on there, flick it. It's going to make a random splatter effect. Very cool, but messy. But it would work very well with your paint, because of course you can always water down the paint to make it as thin as you want. It's going to be, or I can, I'm squeezing it out of a bottle, so there's a lot more to it than it is. I can get more out of it than a pen. So, not too bad there. Probably not going to work so good, again, as I said, if I had to go back in and I wanted to do any black ink lines over this paint. Probably not going to work super good. Especially in the areas where it's thicker, where it dries, it's going to be raised up, and the pen is going to be either bumping it or pulling the paint off the page, stuff like that. So overall, again, I'm going to try to take a photo of this or wait till it dries, maybe scan it and put it at the end so that we have a review. But for me, I would say you've got a couple of very clear options. Now, there are a million other options that are out there, and everyone has a slightly different approach. The Uniball Signo is my favorite. It's my go-to, especially when I want to do white line work. So maybe I just want to clean up little areas of my inking. I want to add a white highlight to something, or somewhere where it's easier than trying to ink around it. I'm going to use probably this one first. The Posca is not too bad. As you can see, as it's dried, it's not nearly as opaque, but it's not bad. This would be pretty good for correcting stuff. The Malto also not too bad. Pretty good for probably simple corrections, something that's not too out there. Wouldn't want to use it to cover whole areas. Then you've got the Presto. Again, pretty good. Just that, like I said, over time, I have found it can sort of yellow, and you will see it on the paper. It won't just look like white. Um, it's not as controllable as any of the pens are, but again, good for really large areas. You can see, I mean, it completely covered up the edge of the black there. Um, really, really good. The rest of them kind of fall into a category. Certainly, the Sharpie oil paint one, it might just be the pen. I've had it for a while, but maybe you have to shake it for a really, really long time. I've never had great success with it anyway, which is why it's not my go-to. The Sharpie acrylic, not bad, but not super. Not as I had very high expectations for it. Um, I would say it's probably about as good as these Faber Castell, maybe a little better than the Faber Castell pens. They are very translucent. The Kuretake brush pen, no good. Do not recommend. Um, and paint, that's up to you how you like to do it. I mean, you can already see like uh, over here on the blue. Hopefully you can see the. I wasn't working off the page. Let's see, make sure. Right? Yeah, right here. Um, the blue is showing through as a purple already as the paint dries. So when I first put it on, it looked very opaque, and then as it's drying, you're starting to see the ink come through. Um, Whereas obviously you don't on some of these pens that I do like. So there we go. So now we're going to kick it back and just wrap it up back at the other screen. Okay, so we're back here at the desk, and that was my take on various white media that I try to use in my comic book creation, my drawing, and my art. I hope you found it interesting. If you are an artist like myself and you do use white tools to add for highlights, corrections, things like that, and maybe there's something that you know that you didn't see on this video that I haven't heard of, drop a comment. Let me know what it is. I'd love to check it out. Like I said, learning about new art supplies is one of my favorite things about being an artist. So I hope this has steered you in some direction. All of these things that I found, you can either get at places like your local art supply store, Michael's, Hobby Lobby. Their office supplies like the Presto correction pens. You can get those at like Office Max. The other ones, pretty much order online. There's a great site, not a sponsor, of course, of any kind, but a site that I use called jetpens.com, where you can get all kinds of foreign pens from other countries. That's where I've got stuff from Germany, from Japan, etc., and a great resource there as well. So check them out, see what you find. Hopefully, maybe one of these will help you out in your art. I hope it does. And again, thank you for checking this out. Thank you for coming to my channel. I hope you think about subscribing and seeing all the other videos that we have coming out regularly here on YouTube. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.